Hey everyone, welcome to lesson 2 of theme 8 GCSE geography. We're going to continue running with the theme of consumerism and explore in a little bit more depth how our ever increasing drive to have more stuff and want more stuff is affecting what we call our ecological footprint. So we're going to identify what we mean by an ecological footprint first of all, look at the links between consumerism and the size of our ecological footprint, and then look at ways that we can reduce our ecological footprint. So pause the video here a moment, write down today's title, and we'll get started. Okay, so what I'd like you to do, take a look at this image. What message do you think it is trying to get across? You don't have to write anything down, just have a little think. What message is this image trying to convey? All right, let's look at the main elements of the picture we've got going on here. So the world is sort of squashed under the weight of this. The man has been drawn disproportionately large. All right, so this guy is really big and he's squashed inside this building that we assume perhaps is a home or a house. And the pressure that this is putting on the earth is clearly causing some issues. What's happening is, as nations across the world are becoming more developed, so okay, yes, Britain, the USA, a lot of these countries in the West, we are already very developed. But we've got the emerging developments of India, of China, of those Asian tigers that we talked about before. As countries are becoming more developed and as lifestyles improve and people have more money, they want more stuff. They want to eat a better diet. They want to have better homes, better infrastructure, more possessions, more clothes, more technology. And all of that is putting pressure on our planet that we simply cannot sustain. All right, so that's what consumerism is and what it's doing to our planet. We want more, but our planet cannot keep up. It cannot sustain our demand. The amount of land that we need per person in our lifetime, if you like, that's what we call our ecological footprint. So this is a metaphorical way of saying what is our stamp on our planet. And our ecological footprint is made up of, okay, so we need to get back and forth to work, back and forth to school, back and forth on our holidays, all the transport we use in our lifetime. What habitats have been destroyed to create the infrastructure? What greenhouse gases have been released in burning the fossil fuels to power it? The size of the actual home, the footprint of our house that we live in over our lifetime. The food that we eat, the water that's been used to grow it, the land that's been used to grow or rear that food and meat. Has there been habitat destruction to be able to do that? What fertilizers have been used that may have caused an impact on the ecosystem in the surrounding area? Seafood. Overfishing is a big thing now. Fish is quite an expensive thing to add to your diet, but as people are becoming richer, countries are becoming more developed, we're eating more seafood, and that's leading to all kinds of issues with overfishing and the impact on the marine ecosystem associated with that. And wood, paper, construction materials. So deforestation not only for building materials, but also for the production of meat. We've talked about that previously. Think about as well the concept of embedded water that we talked about in theme 6. So to make our clothes, to produce a kilo of beef, to make plastic, to make a single sheet of paper, you're talking about liters and liters and liters of water that go into that. So basically, what is the impact on our environment of our lifestyle, sort of going into us, what we consume, what we use, plus what also makes up our ecological footprint is the waste that we produce from all of this. So the plastics that we throw out, the waste that we throw out, the clothes that we chuck in the bin, this is what altogether makes up our ecological footprint. It's basically a way of saying, in our lifetime, what impact do we have on our planet per person? So if we represent that visually in a slightly different way, okay, in an actual footprint, So you've got the fishing going on, you've got the crops being grown, you've got the meat being reared, you've got the deforestation happening to produce products that we want and building materials. You've got our carbon footprint. So all the things that we use, anywhere that energy has gone into making those, and therefore probably power stations and factories that run on fossil fuels, our transport, cars, trucks, planes, trains, all of those that run on fossil fuels, our carbon footprint is the amount of carbon dioxide that's been released into the atmosphere to maintain our lifestyle. So our ecological footprint, it's a measure of the impact that each of us has on the environment, is the simplest way of putting it. It takes into account how much land we need each year to produce the food, water, energy and services and get rid of waste. So it's what goes into our lifestyle and what comes out of our lifestyle. It can either be calculated per year or it can be calculated per lifetime. But it's usually measured in GHA, global hectares per person. So how many hectares of land would it take to maintain your lifestyle? Of things that you eat, things that you use, travel, transport, etc. Now then, our planet is big enough for us each to use 2.1 global hectares per person. Using more than this would be unsustainable, all right? But projections are showing that, like I said, as countries are becoming more developed, as the people in those countries earn more money and so they want more stuff, better diet, more holidays, projections are showing that as time goes on, by 2030, so we're only looking at 9 years away now, we're actually going to be using double this amount. So around 4 global hectares per person. So technically that would mean that we need more than one planet Earth. If you get my drift. I'll come on to the concept of planets in a minute. But basically, we are using more land than we physically have on our planet. And if we keep going the way that we are, we simply cannot sustain ourselves. So pause the video here a moment, please, and write down this top definition here of what an ecological footprint actually is and how we measure it, the concept of global hectares per person per annum. Okay, let's come on to this concept of planets that I'm talking about down here. So how many planets we'd need if everyone lived like a resident in the following countries. So if everyone on the planet lived like Americans do, we would actually need 5 planet Earths. The average American uses so many global hectares per person. We physically don't have that many hectares on the planet. We would need 5 times the number of hectares that we have on planet Earth to sustain everyone in the world if everyone lived like people in America do. People in Britain aren't much better. We would need nearly 3.5 planet Earth's worth of space, of land, to maintain the lifestyle that we enjoy in the UK. As we move down this table, you'll notice obviously the number of planets needed to sustain someone in each country decreases. So Argentina in South America, you're looking at just over 1.5 planet Earth. Same for South Africa, at the very southern tip of Africa. China, believe it or not, I would suggest this data is a little bit out of date, but people in China are using, on average, 1 planet. Now, China is a bit of an anomaly. You've got massive areas of China that are still very rural, quite poor, quite underdeveloped, mostly farming. And then, of course, you've got areas of China that are hugely mega developed, your cities. So a little bit of an anomaly because China is so large. When you average it out, cities and countryside, people in China use an average of 1 planet. People in India are using half a planet. So imagine if everyone just adjusted their lifestyle a little bit. But on average, the world average, if everyone lived like an average world person, we're looking at nearly 1.5 planet Earths we would need. So we've got the extremes up here and the deficits down here. And on average, we need 1.5 planet Earths. We only have 1 planet Earth. So whose fault is it? What is the link here? Why do you think countries like USA and UK need more global hectares per person and therefore have a larger ecological footprint and therefore need more planet Earths than people in China and India in particular would do? Why do you think that's the case? Don't write anything down, just have a little think a moment. Okay, so if we come back to what makes up our ecological footprint, think about it. People in America, people in the UK, people in highly developed countries, we use more of all of these things. And the reason we use more of all of these things is usually directly linked to how much money we're making. GDP, gross domestic product, the average earning per person per year tends to be higher in HICs. And therefore we can afford bigger homes, more transport. There's more than one car per household usually. We go on holiday a lot more. We've got a much more varied diet. We can afford the higher cost of seafood. We use more of these materials because we're building more stuff. When it comes to production of things, our carbon footprint is going to be larger because we want the latest iPhone. We want the latest, newest car, fashion, whatever it is. We want, more, and we can afford it on the whole. And that means that not only are we using more, we're producing more waste as well. And there's different kinds of waste. There's obviously plastic waste, there's food waste, there's all kinds of waste. But what's emerging now as a major problem is e-waste, electronic waste. And we'll come on to that a bit later. So our ecological footprint is for sure directly linked to levels of consumerism, how much we use, and consumerism directly links to how developed a country is. Do you have enough money to consume and use and want loads of stuff and waste loads of stuff, and therefore you would have a larger ecological footprint. So the most crucial thing really is, how do we reduce our ecological footprint? We know it is a problem. We know how it's what it's comprised of. How can we tackle the issue? So why are we needing more and more global hectares per person? It's because of changing lifestyles. Countries are becoming more developed. People have more money, more income, more disposable cash, and they want a higher standard of living. And a higher standard of living means increasing consumerism, and therefore, because you're using more stuff, you're creating more waste. So let's look at increasing consumerism first. We're going to link it a little bit to what we looked at last lesson with consumerism and food, and we're going to talk about overfishing. Now, you've got a graph here. Over time, from the early 1960s to 2013, so each of these bars is a year. Okay, so 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 2010. Each bar is a year. And when you've got broken down in these composite bars is, so of the total catch, so the catch in thousands of tons, of the total catch, this is how many you keep. The purple is your landings, what fish you keep. And the orange is what fish you throw back. Don't worry too much about the fish you throw back. Pretend the top of the orange bar isn't there, I'd say. Just go for landings, all right? What I'd like you to do, put a subheading in your book, why are we needing more GHA? Put down this subheading, put down this subheading, describe the trend on the graph. Does it go up or down? And quote figures. And then try to, using your prior knowledge, explain the trend on the graph. So the trend is sort of, we've got a low level here, it reaches a maximum here, and then yes, you've got varying ups and downs, but the overall trend is a decreasing one down to a minimum in what looks like 2007. Okay, so what did it start at? What was the maximum? And then what has happened down to a minimum? And try and say why you think that is. Don't worry about printing out the graph, just describe and explain. So subheading, sentence, subheading, describe, explain. Pause the video and give it a go, please. Okay, so describe the trend. The number of fish being landed increases from 1963. Now you might have written a figure here saying that the landing catches were approximately, I don't know, just over 100,000 in 1963, reaching a maximum of over 300,000 in 1972. It then decreases to a minimum of around, I'd say about 20,000 in 2007. Okay. So anything along those lines. Why is this happening? As lifestyles improve, people want to eat more meat, including fish. So more and more fish are caught to meet the demand. But over time, this means there's going to be fewer and fewer fish left in the wild populations. There's going to be fewer fish in the sea. So the number of fish getting landed, getting caught and kept is going to decrease because the fish physically aren't there. So essentially what's happening here is we want to eat more fish, yummy, yummy. So fishermen are catching and landing and keeping more fish to keep up with that demand, but it's backfiring from an environmental point of view because there now physically aren't going to be the fish left in the sea for us to continue catching them at the levels that we want to meet the demand that we're creating through increasing consumerism. So how could we reduce our ecological footprint when we're talking about food? Okay, so first off, let's focus on the fishing we've just been discussing. You could introduce a quota. That is a limit on the number of fish that a fisherman is allowed to catch per year. Now, the downside of this is it means that fishermen can't earn as much money. So how are they going to support their family? Less disposable income, lower standard of living, but of course it protects the fish population. So actually, longer term, it would mean a more sustainable income for fishermen. But trying to get the fishing industry to see this in the short term is very difficult. Secondly, you could introduce size and weight limits. And what this means is you have to measure and weigh the fish that you catch, and you're only allowed to keep them if they fall within certain parameters. So this is going to, again, limit the income for fishermen, but it ensures there's enough fish left of breeding age and breeding size so that spawning can happen each year and it maintains the fish populations in the wild. So again, it's trying to get the fishing industry re-educated to see that if you carry on fishing the way that you are, there's going to be nothing left. So the fishing industry will have to shut down completely. Whereas if we just limit it in the short term, you'll be able to make money over a much longer period of time because there's going to be enough fish left for you to keep catching them. Finally, you're only allowed to catch fish at certain times of year. So there's no fishing going on during the spawning season, so the population numbers remain steady. But again, it would limit the amount of money made by fishermen because you're only allowed to fish, say, for 7 months of the year and the other 4 months of the spawning season. If we move from fish to the big debate at the moment about whether we should be moving to more of a plant-based diet, we've all seen the adverts about plant-based is better, eat less meat, eat less meat. Now, yes, we do need to eat a bit less meat. I'm not saying everyone go veggie or vegan, but instead of spag bowl and lasagna and a McDonald's, maybe just have one red meat meal per week. And the reasons behind this, okay, the downsides of eating less meat are going to be that from a household perspective and from your perspective when you get older and start doing your own shopping and your parents' perspective at the moment, sustainably produced meat is often more expensive. And the reason for that is usually you've got to give it more space and you've got to feed it a certain type of feed that is sustainably produced, and that means it's going to be more expensive to rear the animal, so the farmer has to charge more money when they sell it, and the supermarket passes on that increase in price to still make a profit themselves. So unfortunately, ethical choices often cost more money, and households, even in developed countries, often actually can't afford that difference in price. Fair trade bananas are more expensive. Red tractor meat, so if you look for a little red tractor symbol on your meat in the UK, it means it's free range, it means it's sustainable, it means it's ethical. It's often more expensive. Corn-fed chicken instead of soy-fed chicken, I'll come on to soy food in a minute, is often more expensive. So unfortunately, even in HICs, economics often drive consumer choices. You can't afford to eat sustainably, and that's wrong. We need to look at the process and try and bring down those prices, but for now it's a sad fact. And of course, a lot of the cheaper meat comes from low-income countries like cattle ranching in Brazil, and if we change our consumer choices to buy more sustainably farmed or locally produced meat, it means that LIC farmers will lose out and don't have the money to support their families, and so on and so forth. But the upsides to monitoring our meat consumption or only buying meat produced in the UK or produced locally is going to reduce overfishing, because believe it or not, a lot of the pork that we buy and a lot of the chicken that we buy is actually fed on fish meal, which is fish that we don't necessarily eat a lot directly. So we do eat some mackerel and some anchovies, but anchovies and mackerel tend to be a waste fish. So what they do in the subcatch is they keep it, they grind it up, dry it out, and it's used as a protein-based meal to feed to pigs and chickens. So protein means pigs and chickens get fat, it means they taste good, but where in nature would a pig or a chicken eat a fish? Never. And quite often, overfishing of anchovies to create pig and chicken feed, create fish meal, means that those anchovies aren't in the food chain in nature anymore. Penguins, for example, anchovies is a major food source for a lot of penguins. And if the anchovies are being pulled out to make fish meal, they're not there to feed the penguins, and the penguin population numbers decrease. So if we're eating less meat, less demand for fish meal, less overfishing of anchovies, natural food chain would be preserved for other animals like penguins. And it reduces deforestation for cattle ranching and soybean production for animal feed. So we know that cattle ranching in the Amazon rainforest is one of the leading causes of deforestation. But the second leading cause of deforestation in the world's rainforests is removing them to produce soybeans. Some of that soybean production goes into making soy milk and things like that for us for dietary issues, yes. But the majority of soybean production is actually, you can use it to make quite high protein animal feed. So for chickens and cattle in particular. So if we eat a little bit less chicken, a little bit less beef, it means we need a little bit less soybeans because farmers don't need as much animal feed. It's quite a complex issue, the whole plant-based diet versus meat-based diet. So like I say, I'm not saying go out and become vegan or veggie. I'm not saying go to your parents and say, I'm only eating, organic chicken from now on that's been corn-fed, because it's twice the price quite often of soy-fed free-range chicken. So it's a bit of a catch-22 at the moment, but longer term, we are going to have to think carefully about our meat production and consumption. Pause the video here a minute and make this spider diagram into your books, please. Color code the positives and negatives as well. Okay, so I said that the leading causes of the increase in our ecological footprint are consumerism, but also the waste that we produce. So, excuse me, the more stuff we are consuming, the more stuff we are using, not just food, but clothes and products and everything like that. It means that in the UK alone, on average, every 7 weeks, we throw away our body weight in rubbish. I don't know why that number 3 is there. So on average, each person in the UK throws away their own body weight in rubbish every 7 weeks. The average household in the UK produces more than a tonne of waste per year. So a tonne is roughly the weight of a Mini Cooper car. When you take all of this into consideration, we're talking about a total of 31 million tonnes per year of rubbish produced in the UK alone. And bearing in mind that we have fewer planets than the USA. So imagine how many tonnes of waste that is in countries like America. 31 million tonnes of waste per year is the equivalent of 3.5 million double-decker buses. Where is all that rubbish going to go? Yes, we are recycling more than ever before, and Wales is actually very good. We have quite good recycling rates. But most of the waste that we produce, it goes to landfill sites, massive holes in the ground where we just dump all our rubbish. We're running out of space. Landfill sites are getting full, and we don't have spare land to create more landfill sites. The type of waste that we're producing is also shifting. We are recycling more. In terms of our food waste, in terms of our plastics, it is getting a little bit better. But there's a rise in something called e-waste. Our lifestyles now are powered more than ever before by electronics. TVs, mobile phones, laptops, tablets, iPads, all of these things that weren't really a factor even 20, 30 years ago. E-waste is very hard to recycle because of all the different components. There's bits made of glass, bits made of plastic, bits made of coltan, bits made of gold sometimes. So it's very expensive to break down our e-waste and recycle it effectively. We produce about 50 million tonnes of e-waste per year, and that's our phone, our tablet, like I was saying. They not only contain valuable elements like coltan, copper and gold, which can be reused when we recycle them. It also contains very hazardous materials, sometimes even mercury and lead, that are poisonous to the environment and people. So if we just go chucking our e-waste in landfill sites, that mercury and lead is going to get into the environment, into habitats, into ecosystems, and cause massive issues with contamination. Not only of the habitats and ecosystems, but of our water supplies that we are then going to be drinking as well. We've looked at this with microplastics. Microplastics are getting into the waterways, into the oceans, and into fish that we are then eating ourselves. So a lot of the waste that we're producing is backfiring on us. So put a subheading to increasing amounts of waste. Make a little note of how much waste we are producing, where it's going, and then put another subheading about what e-waste is. So make a little summarized version of this slide into your books quickly, please. Okay, so changing lifestyles mean changing types of waste. How are we going to deal with this amount of waste and reduce our ecological footprint? So we've got the 5 R's. These have been around for a while. The ones that you'd be more familiar with are reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce the amount of stuff. Just because a new iPhone comes out doesn't mean you have to have it if your iPhone is working perfectly fine right now. Just because you can get £8 pairs of jeans from Primark doesn't necessarily mean you need one of the same jean in every colour. Reduce your consumption. Try not to use as much. And when things start to get a bit battered and bruised, can we actually reuse them? There's a big movement with upcycling right now. So furniture, it reduces the amount of wood we need to cut down from the forest if we repurpose and reuse furniture that we already have. And recycle, we're really familiar with recycling. But there are 2 other R's that we could consider. Refuse or rethink. Change your habits. Adapt your diet a little bit. When a pair of jeans starts to get a little bit trashed, could you cut them off and make them into shorts? Could you there's an advert doing the rounds lately. I think it's Professor Green sat on top of a washing machine. It's for Ecova washing liquid. So that actually causes less damage to the clothes when they're in the wash, which means your clothes last longer. So we can change our habits. We don't have to buy new things as often. We don't have to eat as much meat, and we don't have to do as much of what we're doing, really. Repair is linked to reuse. Could we use it for a different purpose, like I was just saying there, really, with cutting off your jeans to make shorts, or repair or repurpose, find a new way to use an old object, a little bit linked to upcycling. I'm not saying wander around in secondhand clothes and handmade shorts all the time. That's not what I'm saying. Just, can we consider these 5 R's in our lifestyle a little bit more effectively and extensively? When it comes to e-waste, what we actually do is we export a lot of our waste to newly industrialized countries like India, where recycling processes are cheaper. Like I said, it's difficult to recycle e-waste because it's made of so many different things. It's expensive to do it, therefore, in our country, so we ship it to other countries to do it for us. But this creates huge e-waste dumps. Quite often, near informal settlements, shanty towns and slums, people set up near these e-waste recycling dumps because they can rummage on those dumps to find something to break down, take apart, and then they take the coltan, the copper, the gold to local recycling plants, and they're given a little bit of money for it, which, if it's properly managed, is actually a really good way for low educated populations to earn a little bit of money. But of course, because it's LICs and NICs, this waste is not managed properly. It's often just the quickest way is to melt it down to extract the valuable parts that you can recycle. This means that the mercury, the lead, that's being leaked into the environment. It's not being taken properly and disposed of effectively. It means as well, when you're burning plastic and smelting metals, there's a lot of toxic smoke being added to the air that not only, of course, is going to contribute to climate change, but it's also going to mean really poor quality of life for people living in the area. And the tar and waste and slag runs into the local streams. Slag, by the way, is a term for waste material in this context. And that will run into local streams, contaminate water supply for local people, contaminate drinking supply for wildlife, contaminate the river ecosystem itself. So our e-waste at the moment, quite often, HICs are trying to find a cheaper shortcut to recycling it. So we're sending it to NICs and LICs to do the dirty work for us. But of course, LICs and NICs don't have the rules and regulations surrounding recycling processes that we would have in HICs. And that means huge impact on people being exploited, but also the environment being contaminated. So pause the video here a moment and make a spider diagram of how we could reduce the amount of waste that we produce, and also that we should be aware of how the waste that we produce affects people and the environment. Okay, and that brings us to the end of lesson 2 in Themate. Well done. I'll see you soon for lesson 3. As usual, if you have any questions or queries, drop me an email, gleesona@hubcymru.net.